sports conversation with James Navalins. Joining us today is Anthony Broome at the Wolverine on 3 Sports Network, covering all Michigan athletics. I appreciate you coming on, Anthony.
Oh, of course. Thank you for thinking of me.
Of course, of course. So let's I love bringing on people, getting to know their background, their experiences. Just take me a little bit through your background. I saw, NFL staff writing, SB Nation, obviously a lot of the Michigan Wolverine stuff. So just take us through your background a little bit.
Yeah. Like you said, I previously covered the NFL. I was on a couple teams when I did that. I was on the Minnesota Vikings. I did the Cincinnati Bengals. I was on Washington, and there was one other one I can't remember. Oh, the Falcons when they were that year they went to the Super Bowl. So didn't get to go, just covered it. But that was kind of my first job out of college, which I went to Central Michigan University and was involved in some of the student radio and stuff there. And also like at the same time, got my feet wet doing the work that I did for SB Nation. So I got my start with that SB Nation site covering Michigan. It was I think the year before Jim Harbaugh. And then when Harbaugh took over, I sort of transitioned into I was the managing editor. I ran the site for just about 6.5, 7 years. The last few I spent there full time. So from there, I transitioned into this role with On3 at the Wolverine. And yeah, I've wore a lot of hats early on. It's been kind of a breakneck kind of speed at which a lot of this stuff is moved, but it's I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
Can you take me real quick through that like grind? Because I'm in the coaching industry, so it's very obviously the sports industry as a whole. It's hard to break into, right? Like low pay, just got to get experience, and then kind of build your way up through that. So I know coaching obviously like is emphasized a little bit more on that, like, oh, you got to sacrifice all this, you got to move all over the country, but it's similar for you guys on the reporting side of it. So just take me through kind of those early leaner years and kind of just obviously it's your passion. So in that sense, it's easy, but then there's obviously the reality of the financial component and all the other stuff that comes with it. Just take me through that just a little bit.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I would say, especially if like any young people listen to this, like make money too. Like find ways to supplement. Like it is when you're starting out, especially this is the only industry or one of the only ones where they say you quote unquote have to pay your dues and work unpaid or lowly paid and work long hours. Always like you have to find a way to supplement that income. Obviously, I mean, if you can, that's obviously a you got to take care of yourself financially too, no matter what your passions are. But for me, in terms of the grind and the journey and what it looked like from that perspective, it was, you just have to be, for me, it was, you just have to position yourself. Some people will say right place, right time, but I would say like, you have to network, you have to position yourself in a spot where, hey, when something comes up down the line, this person I may run into or have an experience with, like knows of my work or knows of me or had a conversation with me and I, didn't come off as a crazy person or anything like that. But it was a lot of, and it's weird to even sit here and say it, like time management was a big part of it. And I'm still terrible at it, but you just have to position yourself and you have to be willing to put in the work first and foremost. And you have to also network and be personable and don't be a robot and all those types of things. So for me, like that was a big part of it was just brushing shoulders with people who I respected in the industry, being respectful, also putting, the work's got to be good too. That's always kind of a prerequisite, but yeah, it's just, I guess stay ready so you don't have to get ready would be the way I would sort of break that down.
Absolutely. That's really good stuff. Just take me through your experiences of like, what are some of the best things you've covered? Obviously, coming into this week, we have the Michigan Ohio State game, the game, 11-0, 11-0. Like this is why you kind of do what you do. You want to cover moments like that. So leading up to this, what are some of the best things that you've covered?
Well, I've covered just about every single Michigan Ohio State game. Actually, I haven't been to Columbus since that 2016 game, so the one that came down to the spot in overtime, what have you. So this will be my first trip down there since then. But uh, even just last year, I mean, going to cover a Big Ten championship game, and it's being part of those moments. Michigan's won a lot of football games, but over the last 15 to 20 years, haven't really had a ton of those program, stands empty out onto the field type of moments. So that Ohio State game in Ann Arbor last year was one that I will always remember. This year I've crossed a couple more Big Ten venues off the list. Iowa and Kinnick Stadium was amazing. One of the best atmospheres for a game I've ever been around. So that was a lot of fun. In my previous life, I covered a Super Bowl week. Didn't actually cover the Super Bowl, but when that event was in Minneapolis, I was there throughout the week covering different kind of events and, getting a lay of the land and just being part of the spectacle leading up to that event was something that will always stand out to me too. So, I've been very lucky. I always say this is that, in a lot of ways I've covered a couple bowl games too. Citrus Bowl a couple years ago, was supposed to go to the playoff last year and something else came up. But I always tell people, like, I have been so lucky and I have been so fortunate to, like, there are people that, quite frankly, I think are probably more talented than I am that are still, doing, covering high school games on a Friday night and maybe making meal money back in exchange for it. I've been fortunate. Like, I'll stop short of saying a lifetime of events that I've covered so far. But if you'd told me I would have been to the amount of things I've done before I turned 30, I just turned 30. I don't know if I said you'd be crazy, but I definitely would have thought it was a bit of an ambitious expectation. So I'm very fortunate. I've done a press box for an NFL game. I've covered Big Ten tournament in Chicago and in Indianapolis. So it's there's a lot I'd still like to do. A lot of sort of bucket list trips, what have you. But like I said, I'm just still so lucky and so overjoyed to do what I do.
No, the gratitude that you're showing and expressing just through your experiences and recognizing, like, yeah, everybody doesn't get to do this and experience all that, I think makes it even that more special. Because you're not taking it for granted. Every experience and being a coach and like talking to our players all the time, like you want to kind of live in the moment and enjoy kind of it all, because it all kind of goes by so fast, and I feel like you showing that gratitude and recognizing, no, like, I get to go to Columbus on Saturday and go watch this Michigan Ohio State game and cover it, and recognizing how big of a deal that is. I think that just speaks to kind of your character and kind of just your understanding of the magnitude of everything. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I try to. Sometimes people will be like, "Oh, you have such a cool job," and I'll just kind of be like, it has its pitfalls too. But I'm not sitting in a cubicle. I'm not flipping hamburgers. I'm not shoveling gravel off the side of on the side of the road during So yeah, I am very lucky. So I try to put that in perspective for sure.
100%. Let's get into the meat of this, though. Obviously, I'm bringing you on because Michigan Ohio State, the game of the week, the game of the season, of the college football season. We've had, so just now covering Jim Harbaugh. You said you were there the year before he got there. Mm-hmm. What has been the evolution, you feel like, of the program? Obviously, the biggest season games, 2016, 2018, last year, 2021. But what do you think the biggest evolution's been over the time you've been covering him and the program?
The biggest evolution is that, just going back to when Brady Hoke was the head coach, calling a spade, that was just too big of a bite of the apple for him. He was in over his head. That job, the expectations of it, the duties, it was all too big for him. So the biggest thing that changes when you bring in a Jim Harbaugh is that, he is such a big personality, and he is such a, he's been around the game for so long, coached in a Super Bowl. There's nothing that you can put on that guy's plate that he can't handle. And it's been a struggle at times. Like those first 6 years, I mean, you hadn't beaten Ohio State, had lost a few too many games to Michigan State, had lost some winnable games in there, hadn't won as an underdog. So, talk about how there's nothing that he can't handle, and yet there was so much more meat left on the bone. But to me, the biggest change is just like the attention to detail. I think that's the biggest thing, is that they just do so many little things well that you don't realize a team even does until you do have a coach that doesn't know what they're doing. And, all of a sudden a guy just can't wrap up effectively on a tackle, or a guy isn't, just the little fundamental things that usually when coaches towards the end of coaching regimes, teams are lacking with. They had a bad COVID season in 2020, but other than that, Jim Harbaugh's teams are always fundamentally sound. I think they are typically well prepared. Very, very few times, especially in the last few years, have they come out of the locker room to start a game and you go, gosh, I don't think this team's ready to play today. So they handle their business well. There's a professionalism about them, the way they go about their business. And they always win the games that they're supposed to win. Very rarely have they ever they don't lose to the Rutgers, the Marylands, the Indianas of the world. Again, struggles against the bigger teams are something that sort of defined the early part of that era, I should say. But the ability to take care of business when you're expected to, I think that's the biggest change that we've seen.
No, it really has been. Obviously, it's flipped. How big of a deal do you think the coordinator changes have been?
Well,
over the years, yeah.
It's been huge. I think that as you can be as good of a reply or as good as a head coach and builder of a program as you could possibly be, but every guy kind of goes into it knowing you're only going to be as successful as your assistant coaching staff is. And last year, when they decided to bring Jim Harbaugh back after the COVID season, it was a hard reset. I mean, there's maybe one or two guys left in that building that were there, a couple years prior to that. So I think getting some fresh blood in there was good. I think when you look at the coordinators, what they've allowed them to do is to be more schematically flexible. You're not going into a game saying, oh, we're just going to out physical them. And if someone exploits us, we're just going to double down on our identity. No, they're pliable in what they do. They will mix up, especially defense. They'll mix up their coverages. They'll send pressures from different areas. On offense, they say that they'll take what a defense gives them. Now they've still been extremely run heavy, but if you can't stop the run, then it'd be malpractice to not keep doing it. So, but I do think that there is. The biggest change has been a little more pliability. I mean, they have their identity in that we're going to be physical at the line of scrimmage. We're going to hammer you on both sides of the ball. But I think that there's been an emphasis on, hey, if things get thrown off script, we can make adjustments and tinker with what we do. So to me, that's been the biggest change so far.
Definitely. So now let's get into a little bit more of the game itself against Ohio State. Let's start with J.J. McCarthy. They switched from Cade McNamara, thinking, all right, like a little bit more explosive, a little bit more of a higher ceiling with McCarthy. We saw last week against Illinois when they had to rely on the passing game a little bit more. It didn't, now missed opportunities, missed catches, and that sort of thing. But do you think this will be a defining moment for the J.J. McCarthy era as quarterback? Do you think he's ready kind of for the moment, especially with the injuries that have occurred to Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards?
I don't know if I'd stop short of saying it's a defining moment, but it is one of those like legacy moments where, again, if your running backs are banged up, I just inherently that guy's there's gonna be a little more on his plate. And there have been way too many missed opportunities for bigger plays through the air. I mean, we're talking a deep ball that goes, is just a fingertip length away, or guys that drop passes that are easily catchable. There have been missed opportunities like that, and it all has to come together this week. You can't miss on those opportunities. And I think the biggest thing is that, when you go in and look at the numbers, people will say, oh, well, he's putting up the exact same numbers that Cade McNamara did. And yeah, when you look at the passing numbers, that's fine. And that's accurate, an accurate assessment. But, JJ McCarthy is also able to kind of get on his high horse and scramble out of pressure. And I think that he can still be more of a factor in the QB run game. So when you look at this run game being a bit depleted, those are the areas where, maybe you see more of the bubble screens, maybe you see more of the quick passes. That's he has to play the best game he's played all year. I mean, that's simple as that. I mean, when you're going into a matchup with CJ Stroud, Ohio State's going to get their yards, they're going to get their points. Last year, I mean, you stopped it from being a track meet last year, but I don't know if that's going to be a thing that can happen 2 years in a row. So there's a lot of pressure on him. Legacy game, sure. Something that goes on his resume, sure. But defining game, I mean, I guess that depends on how long he winds up ultimately being Michigan's quarterback. I mean, we would think at the very least through next year, and probably, to be frank, he'll be here through the 2024 season as well. We'll see. But it's a great test to just see where he's at and where this group is at. So you have to find a way to keep it competitive. And if you keep it competitive, I think you have a pretty good shot to win this game.
Do you have any feel on the status of Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards? And then I'll throw in Schoonmaker as well, because obviously they rely on him as a tight end position too.
Yeah, I think, I don't have anything on Blake Corum, not even a gut feel. I mean, if I had to go with a gut feel, I think that he will find a way to play. If it is just a pain management thing, I think that there is a shot that he could be good to go. But I think the other guys will be back. I don't think Michigan's going to walk into this game as a complete mash unit, so to speak. I think that they will have enough guys back on the field to feel good about their chances, especially on defense. I know Mike Morris missed last week's game. I expect him to be back. I expect Junior Colson to play. So, yeah, I mean, this time of year, everyone's banged up. Ohio State has injuries too. So it's something that both teams are going to have to kind of work through in this game. But, Corum's the biggest, Corum's obviously the biggest one, because that is, so much of their identity is tied into what he's been able to do for them this year. And if he's unable to go, you'd take him on the field even at 80%, but if he's unable to go at all, that's going to be hurtful for them.
Yes, most definitely. Obviously, that run game is such a reliability and a staple of the Michigan offense. Let's flip sides of the ball. Marvin Harrison Jr., probably the best receiver in the country. Obviously, not even draft eligible at this point, so he'll be back for another year. Containing him. Obviously, they have a trio of receivers, but he is the guy. How big of a factor is just containing him? Because honestly, you're not going to stop him entirely, right? So containing him, do you believe they have the ability to contain him on a consistent basis throughout Saturday's game?
I think they do, because they were able to contain. I mean, if Jackson Smith and Jigba playing or not playing could also affect this next statement. But I saw Ohio State, they always just have five-star receiver. They're kind of a factory in that regard. But when I look at this team, it's not Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith, and Jigba like it was last year. So, but those guys will still be able to move the ball. That's what they're built to do. The key is just keeping them in front of you. And part of it too is that, you have to take the big play away from Ohio State. That's what Michigan did really well in that game last year, where yeah, they got their yards. That, by the end of the game, CJ Stroud had thrown for almost 400 yards, but you were content in letting them go 9, 10, 11, 12 plays down the field. And then you get down in the red zone, you shrink the field a little bit. Everything just gets a little bit tighter down there. But yeah, I mean, the concern would be, Marvin Harrison Jr. has as impressive a catch radius as any player at his position in college football. He's a guy that, they're not 50-50 balls when you throw them to him. They're probably closer to like 75-25 balls. So yeah, Michigan's, it's going to be interesting to see how they stop him. I think the key is like, yeah, you'll let him have his 12, 15 catches if it comes down to that, but you don't want to get beat over the top. So that's to me, I think the biggest thing is making sure Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't beat you over the top, and also on the flip side, taking their run game away, making it less effective. Because if Ohio State can't be at least somewhat balanced, the numbers, for as much as there is a contrast in styles, and historically always has been, it usually comes down to the team that runs the ball better. So the team that does that is going to be the one that winds up winning this game. And I think both are well equipped to do it. I think both are also well equipped to stop it, especially if Michigan's missing one or God forbid both of their star running backs. But to me, that's what it comes down to.
So that's a perfect transition, because I was going to ask you the keys for this game. So outside of the running game and that side of the line of scrimmage, what would you say outside of that is the biggest key?
For Michigan on offense, it's, you have to hit on some of these deep passes. Ohio State, even whether Quorum's out there or not, they're gonna stack the box. They're gonna want to take the run away from this Michigan team. Their offensive line can still block it, but if you don't have the backs out there that have the same vision or cutback ability, it's less effective. It just is. That's how football works. So for me, it's, when these opportunities to make plays through the air, and you don't have to hit on all of them, but if you just hit on one on a third down that keeps a drive moving, that could be a game changer. That could be a drive changer. So for Michigan, that's the key on that side of the ball. And on defense, like I said before, need to generate some pressure. I mean, CJ Stroud is, he's going to pick you apart if you just let him stand back there and do his taxes or make a sandwich or whatever it is. So they're going to have to find ways to, load the line of scrimmage with some of those extra guys. Ohio State's tackles have played really well. It's going to be an all hands on deck effort for Michigan. But they feel like they're well equipped to do that, and we'll see what happens. But for me, it's you gotta hit on the opportunities that present themselves, and on both sides of the ball, really. I mean, you can't drop an interception on defense. You can't, on offense, you can't fumble the football when you're down in the red zone. Like, it's the little things, the details. So the good news for Michigan is that I think it's in the DNA of this group that they have to not let those opportunities slip away. So they've played their best football when their back has been most up against the wall.
What would you say a win would mean for their program, for their trajectory? It's one thing, finally, you get them at home, you finally beat them. It's another thing in a second consecutive year, you go on the road to Columbus, get a win, put yourself in position again, go to Big Ten title, go to college football playoff, and maybe this time they do match up with a Georgia, maybe a little bit better. Georgia's not as potent as they were a year ago, and maybe they finish the job and win a national championship. What do you think a win would mean for the program?
Well, it legitimizes what you did last year against Ohio State. First and foremost, I think there is still kind of this narrative or thought process, at least down with Ohio State fans and in their circle, that last year was a fluke because, oh God, it snowed. It didn't really snow. There was like a dusting of snow on the field at best. But guys had the flu, and that was a fluke Ohio State team. The biggest thing would be a reaffirmation that your formula against that team works. So to me, that's something that has a ripple effect on the recruiting trail. That is something that has ripple effects, nationally. All of a sudden you're talking about having true Michigan comes in this game with momentum in the series, but you're talking about a 2-game win streak, which hasn't happened in this series for Michigan in at least 20 years. They haven't won in Columbus since the year 2000. So it is for that, it's everything. And call a spade. Like, you win this game, you're winning the Big Ten, because whoever gets thrown at you next weekend will be basically be cannon fodder from the Big Ten West. So yeah, Michigan, I said this coming off last year, that what they didn't have to be a one-year wonder, and that this could be sustainable, and that they have a nice little window to, even if it doesn't work out this year, they'll be right back in the mix next year. So it's, to me, it would just be a reaffirmation, a doubling down that this Jim Harbaugh 2.0 era at Michigan can be what was promised in the first iteration, is that you're in the conversation for Big Ten titles, for national titles. And to me, I mean, right now it's still just get in the playoff and see what happens from there. So, yeah, if you're able to take care of your business, that changes everything. So yeah, that would be what I would say. It's just a doubling down of what Jim Harbaugh has built and what the last 2 years have been for this program.
Let's flip the script on that then. What if they lose? And then scenario wise, obviously their non-conference schedule has been much maligned for how weak it was. Obviously they would need help. What do you think the odds of them getting into the playoffs still with a loss?
I would still say it's probably about 50-50. I mean, you're going to need help from, Georgia taking care of business over LSU, and maybe Notre Dame. You have to root for Notre Dame to give you some help, which also, would be tough to stomach for some Michigan fans. But Notre Dame beating USC, I mean, USC having just another loss somewhere in the next couple of weeks would be helpful. Yeah, I mean, it's not. If they go out and they play the game of the century against Ohio State and just barely lose, I think there's a shot that they get in there. But I think the way that this is, the message to me is pretty clear. Like, if Michigan wants in the playoff, they better beat Ohio State. If not, they're going to the Rose Bowl, which also, okay, twist my arm. Well, what a terrible outcome that would be too. But in terms of what a loss would mean, I mean, it would be, this game is everything for those guys. I mean, this is all off season, all year. It's built up to this. And, the one thing that has been kind of a byproduct of what happens when they lose to Ohio State is that it usually turns into a bowl loss too, because for whatever reason. But, for them to have an opportunity to win 12 games again, I think would be massive. Playing in a Rose Bowl where you probably would play against an Oregon or a USC or maybe even a Washington. It's not a terrible consolation prize, but when you're a pro, like they just want so much more than that. They set 4 goals ahead of this year: beat Michigan State, beat Ohio State, win the Big Ten, win the national title. If you don't get this one on Saturday, you're 1 for 4. Like, it's just not, it's not where you want to be. So yeah, I think that by hook or by crook, they want to find a way to get this one done. And I still think, even with the injuries, they have the ability to do so. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Anthony, I appreciate you coming on this. This is Sports Conversation with James Navalance. I know you're super excited to get to Columbus to watch this fantastic matchup. College Game Day is heading there as well. I'm sure you're going to have a terrific time in that environment, and just this is what it's all built up to be, and this is why you do what you do. So I'm excited for you to be there this time in Columbus.
So thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy doing things like this. So yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, I really appreciate you.